The stars were no comfort. They glittered above Shivra's head in the deep black expanse of space, cold and indifferent, as if they were far beyond the reach of any living being. The escape pod had crumpled, its hull breached by the brutal descent through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of fire in the sky before it crashed. She remembered little of the impact, only the feeling of weightlessness before the sudden, violent stop. When she awoke, disoriented and gasping for breath, it was to the unfamiliar scent of wet earth and the distant, eerie calls of creatures whose sounds did not belong to any world she had ever known. Jivra's heart thrummed against her chest. Her Tarkani senses, fine-tuned over centuries of evolution, told her what her eyes could not yet comprehend. Danger. The jungle surrounding her, thick with towering trees and dense foliage, was alive in ways she couldn't fully understand. The atmosphere tasted heavy with the scent of unfamiliar flowers and damp soil. No signs of civilization, no signs of her people. She was alone. Her pod, once sleek and powerful, lay in ruins not far off. The emergency beacon was silent, its signal lost in the chasm of broken circuits. She doubted anyone would come for her. Stranded on this distant world, it seemed all she had was the air she breathed and the ground she walked. Fear churned in her gut, a thick, choking wave. Humans. The thought of them, the apex predators, the ruthless, insatiable creatures who consumed anything weaker than themselves, filled her with dread. She had been taught to fear them all her life, to stay far from them, to know that they saw Tarkani, creatures like her, as little more than prey. She clenched her fists, her sharp claws digging into the soft soil beneath her. She had no choice but to survive, just as her people always had. The stories, the warnings, they echoed in her mind. Her eyes darted through the jungle, scanning every shadow, every movement in the distance. The trees seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, their gnarled trunks twisting into dark shapes in the dim light. The air felt thick, like it was pushing back against her every breath. It was suffocating. She could hear something in the distance, scratching, the snap of branches underfoot. No animal she knew of made such a sound. It was almost deliberate. The weight of the silence pressed down on her as she moved, her mind racing. Survive, she reminded herself. The jungle, with its alien noises and oppressive weight, was no place to dawdle. She needed shelter, she needed food, she needed a plan. But then, a rustle. Close. Too close. Shivra froze, every muscle coiled tight, her instincts rising to the surface. It was impossible. Impossible. No animal should be this near, not unless it meant harm. Her heart beat louder in her ears, and she pressed herself against the nearest tree, blending into the shadows. Was it a human? Her first instinct was to flee. She could outrun anything, couldn't she? But something in her gut told her that running would be useless. There was no escape. The rustling came again, followed by the sound of breathing. A steady, rhythmic inhale. It wasn't an animal. She could hear the subtle difference, the way the breath was controlled as though it belonged to something, or someone. Number, not possible, not here. Jivra's eyes darted around in panic, her mind caught in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She had prepared herself for many dangers, wild creatures, toxic plants, even the harshness of the planet's weather. But this, a human, so close, so near, she hadn't expected it. No human had ever set foot in Tarkani space, not that she knew of. Humans were ruthless. They destroyed, they killed without thought. She had heard the stories. They hunt, they devour. They are apex predators. Her claws flexed at her sides, ready to lash out at whatever it was. But a strange hesitation kept her rooted in place. She couldn't risk the noise, not yet. Every instinct told her to hide, to wait. She would observe, learn. Whatever this is, whatever is coming for me, I will not be its prey. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breathing, harsh and ragged. Her mind raced, but she kept her focus sharp, listening for any clue, anything that might reveal the nature of the threat. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hey." The word was soft, gruff, and filled with something that didn't belong in the jungle's wild ferocity. "Concern? Are you out there?" The voice again, closer now, steady. Shivra's chest tightened. The voice belonged to a human. It was undeniable. Her mind was a blur, her body frozen. The breath she had been holding released in a shudder. How had it found her? How was it here? Before she could respond, a figure emerged from the underbrush, stepping into the dim light of the alien moon. A man. He was tall, rugged, dressed in tattered clothing. His face was weathered, his eyes scanning the trees as if he were searching for something, or someone. His gaze landed on her, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. For all the stories she had heard, for all the knowledge of humanity's cruelty, Shivra could not make sense of what she was seeing. There was no malice in his expression, no predatory gleam. His gaze was steady, curious. He wasn't here to hunt her. At least, not yet. The man spoke again, his voice softer, with an odd gentleness that caught her off guard. "You lost too?" The words hung in the air, as if the weight of them alone could unravel her entire understanding of what she'd been taught about humans. The jungle stretched around them in thick silence, and Shivra had only one question left. Was this the beginning of something far worse? Or was it the chance for survival? The jungle swallowed the sound of her breath. Shivra stayed perfectly still, her eyes never leaving the man who stood before her. The strangeness of the moment, his calm, his quiet curiosity, disarmed her in ways she hadn't expected. He wasn't reaching for weapons. His posture wasn't aggressive. In fact, he seemed almost uncertain. It was as though he hadn't anticipated her reaction, as though he were trying to understand what to do next. "Are you lost too?" he repeated, his voice barely more than a rasp. Shivra's pulse quickened, not from fear of him, but from the unfamiliarity of the situation. She could smell the faint hint of sweat on him, mixed with the musk of the jungle and the stale air of the wreckage. His presence was like a stark contrast to the environment, which teemed with unseen threats. His eyes, dark and sharp, never left hers. He had noticed the tautness in her stance, the way her muscles were wound tight, prepared to flee, prepared to fight. She wasn't hiding it, though she should have been. Human. The word echoed in her mind. Apex predator. The sound of the jungle returned, louder now, the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant calls of strange creatures vibrating in the undergrowth. Every shift in the air made her tense, and for the first time since landing, she considered that she might not be alone in this jungle with the man. What if he wasn't the only human here? "I'm not looking to fight," he said, finally breaking the silence, his eyes softening. "I'm not a threat." Shivra narrowed her eyes, assessing him. His words seemed too simple, too easy. If humans were truly as dangerous as the stories, why would he bother explaining himself? Was he playing some sort of game, luring her into a false sense of safety before revealing his true nature? Her claws itched at her sides, her instincts screaming at her to be cautious. But something in the man's eyes, the faint glimmer of vulnerability there, made her hesitate. He seemed human, yes, but so much like her in this moment. Lost, alone, vulnerable. For a moment, she thought about the stories, the ones her elders had whispered to her, of humans who captured Tarkani and devoured them, of cold, calculating creatures who consumed without mercy. She thought of her people, who had warned her of the dangers of humanity and of the endless tales of predators who stalked, hunted, and feasted. But here, before her, was this man, no fangs, no hunger in his gaze, just exhaustion, and a strange, quiet desperation that mirrored her own. She swallowed, shifting her weight uneasily. "You didn't attack me," she said cautiously, testing the words as they left her lips. He shook his head slowly. "Number, I don't want to hurt you." His hand hovered uncertain, as though reaching out but unsure whether to risk the gesture. The movement seemed almost innocent, but that was the kind of openness that could be a trap. A human predator, using kindness to lower her guard before striking. She would not be fooled. She had been taught better than that. "You're stranded here too?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. His eyes tightened, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. "Yeah," he answered, glancing away. "Been here longer than I'd like. I've tried everything, but no one's coming." Shivra considered this. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to. There were too many unknowns here, too many things that didn't fit. A human in the jungle, a lone man struggling just like her. It felt wrong, like a riddle that had no solution. "What happened?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. She didn't want to get drawn into whatever personal tragedy had led this man to the same fate. She didn't need any more complications, especially not with someone so dangerous. The man took a long breath. He didn't seem to mind the question, though it must have been painful to answer. "The same thing that happened to you, I guess. A crash, a mistake, some kind of freak accident." Shivra's gaze flicked to the wreckage of the pod, still visible through the trees behind him, its jagged remains sticking out from the underbrush. A freak accident. She wasn't sure she bought it. There were no coincidences here. Nothing about this jungle, this world, seemed random. Everything was part of a design, part of a pattern she was beginning to fear she couldn't see. "So why aren't you hunting me?" she asked. The question was blunt, but her patience was wearing thin. She didn't want to linger in this fragile moment of peace when she felt the pulse of danger beneath it. Her eyes darted toward the jungle's edge, her senses tingling as she scanned for anything moving in the distance. He seemed taken aback by the directness of her words but didn't flinch. "I told you, I don't want to fight. I just need help." Shivra's brow furrowed. "Help?" Her claws flexed at her sides. The words echoed in her mind. This was something she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't prepared to help him, not when she was barely managing to survive herself. But there was something about the way he spoke, like the weight of his own isolation was suffocating him. "How do I know you're not lying?" she asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. "I'm not," he replied, and there was a rawness to his words that struck her. "I swear, I've been trying to survive just like you. I've been alone for so long." His voice faltered. Shivra studied him carefully. Something in his words seemed too raw, too genuine to be a lie. Yet there was still the ever-present question. Why? Why was he so insistent on her trust? Why would he risk his life for someone he didn't know, someone like her, when every part of her screamed that humanity was nothing but danger? She took a step back. "You're still a human," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. He watched her closely. "So are you, but I'm not the one you should fear," he said quietly, his voice suddenly full of something darker, something unspoken. Her head snapped up. What did he mean by that? Before she could ask, a distant growl from the jungle's edge shattered the fragile stillness between them. A ripple of movement, too quick, too erratic, caught her eye. Something was coming, something large, something hungry. Shivra's body tensed, her senses flaring as she saw the glint of eyes in the underbrush moving closer. She didn't wait for the man to react. She couldn't. With a sudden burst of speed, she was already moving, her legs propelling her through the thick jungle underbrush, her claws outstretched. Behind her, she heard the man's feet pounding in the dirt, following, but Shivra didn't dare look back. The danger was too close. The beast was already upon them, and for the first time, she realized that her survival didn't lie in the stories she'd been told about humans. It lay in her instincts. It lay in the need to survive, no matter what. But the question remained, would it be enough? The jungle was alive with sound, a cacophony of growls and rustling leaves as the creature pursued them with relentless fury. Shivra's heartbeat pounded in her ears, each footfall a testament to the sheer power of the beast behind her. She dared not look back. If she hesitated, it would catch them both. Branches slapped against her skin as she ran, the underbrush thick and unforgiving, but her Tarkani instincts guided her with eerie precision. She could hear the predator gaining on her, its low growl vibrating through the earth, a promise of impending violence. She pushed herself harder, faster, but the sound of the creature's claws scraping against the ground made it clear that it was too close. Logan was right behind her. His breath labored, but he didn't slow. For the first time, Shivra could feel the weight of his presence, not as an enemy, but as an ally. The distance between them and the predator closed in with each passing second. A rustle of branches ahead made Shivra's heart skip. An opening. She veered sharply to the left, bursting through the thick vegetation into a clearing. The predator followed, its monstrous form crashing through the underbrush, faster than Shivra had anticipated. There was no time to think, no time for a plan. Instinct took over. "Logan!" Shivra snapped over her shoulder as she skidded to a halt. The clearing was too open, too exposed, but there was one advantage: height. Her eyes darted upward, catching sight of the massive roots of a nearby tree, twisting upward like the fingers of a giant. Without hesitation, she leapt for it, her claws digging into the bark as she pulled herself up with unnatural agility. Logan's grunt echoed behind her as he reached the base of the tree, eyes wide with panic. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, but there was no time for an answer. The creature was closing in, its growls now guttural, furious. Shivra shot a glance back. Logan had stopped, his eyes locked on the predator barreling toward them. His expression was unreadable, a tight mixture of fear and resolve. He wasn't going to run. "Get up here now!" Shivra hissed, but Logan didn't move. Instead, he turned and faced the beast, his body tense, his posture defensive. He was preparing to fight. Shivra's stomach twisted, the jungle's air growing thick with tension. She had seen enough of the creatures here to know that no one survived them through brute force, not without the kind of firepower she had never seen. Humans weren't known for their physical strength. They were the clever ones, the thinkers. But Logan stood there, muscles taut, his eyes steely with determination. And then, for the first time, Shivra saw it. She saw the thing that all her people had warned her about, the thing that had never been in the stories, the thing that couldn't be predicted, the thing that made a human different from everything else in the galaxy. Logan Hale wasn't afraid. The predator lunged, a blur of fangs and claws, its eyes wide with hunger. Shivra's blood froze as she watched it close the distance between them in mere moments. Time seemed to slow, her heart hammering in her chest, until Logan's arm shot out, grabbing a long, thick branch lying nearby. He swung it with startling force, slamming it into the creature's skull just as it lunged for him. The beast staggered back, stunned but undeterred, its eyes flashing with rage. "Logan!" Shivra cried, leaping from the tree. She was already in the air before she fully understood what she was doing. The world around her blurred as she twisted in midair, her claws extending toward the beast's back. But before she could reach it, the creature's tail whipped toward Logan, a deadly strike aimed at his ribs. Her stomach dropped. "No!" Shivra landed just behind him, using her body to knock him out of the way as the tail lashed across the ground, missing them both by inches. Logan fell hard, crashing against the ground with a grunt, but he quickly scrambled to his feet, eyes now wild with panic. "What the hell is this thing?" he yelled, clutching the branch in his hand, ready to swing again. The creature recoiled, enraged, before charging once more. Shivra's mind raced as she studied the beast. It was larger than any predator she had seen on this planet, a massive, hulking creature with a long, sleek body, covered in scales that shimmered in the dim light of the jungle. Its teeth were sharp as knives, its claws as long as daggers, and its eyes were pools of dark, predatory hunger. This wasn't just a beast. This was a monster. "Back up!" Shivra shouted at Logan as she crouched, her body coiled, ready to spring. "We need to—" The ground beneath her trembled. She turned her head just in time to see the jungle shift, the trees groaning under the pressure. A new rumble echoed through the air, a deeper, more resonant tremor, and in an instant, Ziva realized it wasn't just the predator they needed to worry about. It was something else. A thick, blinding mist poured into the clearing, swirling like smoke. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Zivra's skin tightened with the change. A chill ran down her spine as she heard the faintest clicking sound, like insect wings fluttering, but louder, more mechanical. The air tasted of metal and something else, something wrong. She grabbed Logan by the arm, yanking him toward the tree line. "We have to move, now." But Logan resisted. "What's happening? What is this?" The fog thickened around them, and Zivra's senses sharpened. Her Tarkani abilities heightened with every passing moment, but instead of the predator's scent or the rumble of a distant creature, all she could smell was mechanical. A buzzing, hissing sound like something not of this world, like something alive, but unnatural. "I don't know," Zivra said, her voice low, tense. "But we need to get to cover. Now." As if on cue, the jungle erupted with the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, metallic. Zivra's breath caught in her throat as a new figure emerged from the mist. A humanoid silhouette, taller than any Tarkani, its body encased in black armor, its face hidden behind a visor that glowed with a faint green hue. It moved with precision, its head swiveling as though scanning the area. A low, rasping voice came from a speaker embedded in the armor. "Target acquired. Proceeding with capture." Zivra's heart stopped. "Capture?" "Logan," she hissed urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "We need to run. Now." But Logan, who had no understanding of the situation, still stood frozen, his mind racing with questions, his hands gripping the branch like he could still fight. The armored figure took another step forward. Zivra could see the faint outline of a weapon at its side. She felt her chest tighten as she realized the true scale of their danger. They were no longer alone in this jungle. Something far worse than the beast lurked now. Something she didn't understand. And it was hunting them. The mist hung thick in the air, curling like tendrils of smoke, choking the space between Hivra and Logan. Each breath felt heavy, laden with the metallic scent of the armored figure approaching. It wasn't just the chilling presence of the creature behind them. It was the sudden realization that this wasn't just another monster in the jungle. No, this was something other, something deliberate, something far more dangerous. Logan stood rigid, the branch in his hand now a feeble weapon against the growing storm around them. He turned to Zivra, his face a mask of confusion and fear, but there was no time to explain. The truth of the situation was unraveling, too fast for either of them to understand. "Zivra," Logan began, his voice strained. "What the hell is that thing?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gripped his arm, her eyes never leaving the armored figure that stepped forward with mechanical precision. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, as if it had no fear of either of them. It knew it was in charge. "They're not just hunters," Zivra finally whispered, barely able to contain the tension in her voice. "That thing isn't from this planet." Her eyes flicked back to the creature, feeling the heat of its gaze even through its helmet. "It's a hunter, yes, but not like the predator we've seen." Logan's brow furrowed, his confusion deepening. "So, what is it then? A soldier? A bounty hunter?" "Yes," she said, taking a step backward, pulling Logan with her. "But not just any bounty hunter. This is something far worse. It's hunting us for a reason. Not just the Tarkani, but me." Logan opened his mouth, but she cut him off, her voice urgent. "Don't ask yet. I don't know why, but I know it's after me. United States. We're not safe until we find out who sent them." The figure advanced again, its footsteps unnervingly calm, as if it had all the time in the world. The green light from its visor seemed to scan the area, moving between Zivra and Logan, as if calculating the risk of pursuing them. Zivra's claws twitched with the urge to fight, but the knowledge that they were outclassed hit her with brutal force. This wasn't an ordinary enemy. This was something engineered, something built to bring them down. Even if they fought with all their might, they would never make it out alive. She knew that. "I don't know if we can outrun it," Logan said, his voice tight with the stress of their situation. "But I sure as hell am not going down without a fight." Givra's hand tightened around his arm. "We don't fight this. We survive." The words felt bitter in her mouth because survival meant a choice neither of them wanted to face. There was only one way out, and it required trust. Not the kind of trust that came from years of alliance or loyalty, but the kind that came from a gut feeling, from the certainty that if they didn't act together, they would both die here. The figure halted a few paces away from them, its helmet casting a shadow across the ground. It was close enough now that Sivra could hear the faint hum of its internal machinery, like the quiet breath of something ancient, something calculated. The voice that issued from it was guttural, artificial. "Surrender," the voice said, modulated and cold, a single word cutting through the tension like a blade. "You have no chance of escape. This is your last warning." Logan's hands gripped the branch tightly, but his gaze flicked to Sivra. It was a split second, but it told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't afraid, not of the threat, not of the danger, but he was beginning to understand the stakes. The time for hesitation had passed. Givra's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to run, to flee, to escape the inevitable. But there was no running from this, not anymore. She could see the questions in Logan's eyes, but she didn't have time to answer them. The pieces were starting to come together in her mind, swirling like the fog around them. There was a connection here, a reason that this mysterious figure had come after her. But the full picture? It remained a blur, just out of reach. "Logan," she said, her voice hard now, cutting through the still air. "We can't outrun them, but we can make a stand. They won't kill us. They'll capture us." He didn't hesitate this time. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "Then what the hell are we waiting for?" Givra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted, her body attuned to the rhythms of the jungle, sensing the tremor in the ground beneath her feet. A whisper of movement, faint but undeniable. Her sharp eyes darted to the side, catching the flash of something else. More figures emerged from the mist, humanoid shapes that flickered in and out of the fog. They were like shadows, their armor blending seamlessly with the jungle around them. Dozens of them. Shivra's stomach churned. The realization hit her like a cold slap. This was a force, a unit, and it was closing in. The armored figure nearest to them raised its weapon, some kind of long-range rifle, and aimed it at Shivra. Her breath caught in her throat as a sudden surge of cold, raw fear shot through her. She couldn't let it end like this. Not now. Not when she was so close to answers. "Move!" Givra hissed at Logan, pushing him toward the trees. Her voice was sharp with urgency, and despite the chaos around them, Logan obeyed. They ran. In the moment of chaos, Givra's mind raced with possibilities. Her heart pounded in her chest as her senses screamed, telling her that time was running out. She had no plan, no perfect strategy, but she knew what had to be done. If they were going to survive, she needed to give Logan a chance. He was their only way out. They sprinted through the underbrush, the fog thickening, their movements frantic as the sound of pursuing footsteps drew closer. Logan, ever determined, was right beside her, but the others were coming. Fast. Givra's claws scraped against a fallen branch, her mind spinning with questions. What was it that they knew? What were they after, and why her? Her heart skipped a beat when the answer clicked into place. The device. The device she had been trying so desperately to keep hidden, the one that had brought them here, the one that could change everything. And now they were after it. After her. Givra's thoughts blurred as she glanced over at Logan, his expression grim, his focus set. There was a choice before them, one that neither of them had expected to face, a final, desperate sacrifice. To escape this, someone had to stay behind. Someone had to hold them off long enough to ensure the other had a chance to flee. It was clear what she had to do. The jungle was eerily quiet, the silence pressing in on Shivra as she stood at the edge of the clearing. The fog had begun to dissipate, but the weight of what had just unfolded hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating veil. Her pulse thudded in her ears, each beat a reminder of the narrow escape they'd barely survived. Every breath felt as if it were the last, yet she kept moving forward deeper into the heart of the jungle. There was no choice now. She couldn't afford to stop. Behind her, Logan had vanished. She couldn't afford to look back, not now. Not when there was so much left to unravel. She had made the sacrifice. The decision had been hers to make, and it was done. The trees ahead loomed like silent sentinels, their towering trunks fading into the twilight mist. The path was narrow, twisting through the thick underbrush, but her instincts guided her with quiet precision. Shivra knew she couldn't stay in one place for too long. The hunters were relentless, and every second they wasted meant a risk that Logan might not have escaped as he should. He was her anchor, the only person who had ever come close to understanding the weight of her burden. The device in her pocket was cold against her skin. She hadn't spoken of it to Logan, not fully, not until the very end. He had been too focused on survival, on their immediate danger, to question why she had been so desperate to keep it hidden. But the truth had been clear. Whatever that device was, it was more than just a means of escape. It was the key to everything. It's time to face it, she thought, her jaw tightening as the shadows shifted around her. No more running. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the small, intricately carved object. It hummed softly in her palm, the energy within it thrumming like a heartbeat. She stared at it, feeling its pull, the raw power that lay within its core. This was what the hunters had wanted from the beginning. This was what they had been hunting her for. And now, she had no choice but to use it. The device was designed to do more than just unlock doors or transport its user. It could reshape worlds. It could alter the very fabric of space and time. The hunters, the soldiers, the mercenaries, they were all just pawns in a much larger game, a game she had unknowingly become part of. The true purpose of the device was still a mystery, but Shivra had a sinking feeling that if she didn't take control of it, the universe would. She placed it on the ground, kneeling beside it, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. The markings on the device began to glow, faint lines of energy weaving through its structure, pulling at the air around her. Her breath caught in her throat as the power inside it surged, threatening to overwhelm her senses, and then the ground beneath her feet trembled. Shivra stood up quickly, her heart racing. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the horizon, but the jungle remained still. No movement, no sound, and yet she felt it, a presence that had been lurking just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Shivra, a voice called from the mist, soft yet commanding. A familiar voice. You can't run from your destiny. Her body tensed at the sound of her name, her eyes narrowing. The figure stepping from the shadows was not human. The tall, slender silhouette moved with an eerie grace, its features hidden beneath a hooded cloak. But there was something about the way it moved, something unmistakable about the energy it radiated. I was wondering when you would show yourself, Shivra said, her voice steady, though the weight of the moment threatened to choke her. You've been pulling the strings all along, haven't you? The figure didn't answer immediately. Its eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of its hood, locked onto hers with an intensity that was almost suffocating. Then, finally, it spoke. You think you understand the purpose of the device. You think you know its power, the voice whispered, low and velvety. But you don't. Not yet. Shivra clenched her fists, feeling the surge of frustration and fear rising in her chest. Then explain it to me. Tell me why I'm being hunted. Tell me what you want. The figure remained silent for a long moment, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Finally, it spoke again. The device was never meant for you, Shivra. It was meant for someone else, someone much older, someone much more powerful. And you. The figure stepped closer. You've just unlocked a door that no one can close. Shivra's heart dropped. The weight of those words struck her like a physical blow, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was unsure of herself. What had she unleashed? She began, but the figure raised a hand, silencing her. No, it said softly. This was always going to happen. The question is not whether you can stop it. The question is whether you should. Because the truth, Shivra, is that you were never meant to be here. This galaxy was never meant to be yours. The realization hit her like a freight train. The hunters, the soldiers, they hadn't been after her just for the device. They had been after her because she was the key to something much bigger, something she had yet to fully understand. And now, she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. Who are you? Shivra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mind raced, trying to connect the pieces, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The figure stepped fully into the light then, its cloak falling away to reveal its true form, a being with pale, luminescent skin and dark, empty eyes. It was an alien, but not one like the Tarkani or anything she had encountered before. This was something ancient, something primal. I am the one who set the game in motion, the figure said. I am the one who will end it. And then, before Zivra could react, it reached out and pressed its palm against her chest. Pain shot through her, searing through her body like 1,000 needles. She gasped, unable to move, unable to scream. The device at her side began to tremble, its energy amplifying with every second. No, Zivra cried out, but the figure's grip only tightened. The choice was always yours, the figure murmured, and you've made it. In that final, desperate moment, Shivra realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for control over something far bigger than herself, something that could change the course of the entire universe. And in that realization, she made her final decision. With a surge of will, she reached for the device, pulling it free from the ground, and slammed it into the figure's chest. The energy inside it exploded outward, a blinding light consuming everything in its path. And then, silence. When the light faded, Shivra stood alone in the clearing, her chest heaving, her body trembling. The figure was gone, erased from existence. The jungle was still. The hunt had ended. But at what cost? She took a slow, trembling breath, staring at the now inert device in her hand. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The galaxy had changed. And with it, so had she. Kalith stood motionless before the ancient relic, her pale eyes narrowing in both intrigue and caution. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered. A cylindrical structure, dark as the void itself, sat embedded in the rock of the asteroid's surface, its edges lined with strange pulsating symbols that seemed to shift with the dim light of the distant stars. She hadn't noticed it at first, hidden beneath the dust and debris of centuries. But something about it had called to her, urging her closer, compelling her to investigate. The storm outside howled with unnatural intensity, shaking the very foundations of the small asteroid base. The winds clawed at the perimeter, its ferocity matched only by the silence of the alien object, which stood undisturbed in its forgotten cradle. Kalith's sharp senses could feel the air growing heavier, thick with an energy she could not identify, yet instinctively knew was dangerous. Do you think it's safe? Marcus Vance's voice broke the stillness. He stood behind her, his figure a mere shadow in the pale light of the asteroid's failing power grid. The human diplomat's voice held the usual blend of skepticism and concern, but there was something else in his tone, an undercurrent of curiosity, or perhaps even awe. Kalith didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the artifact, drawn to its intricate patterns, which seemed to pulse like a heartbeat of some long-dead creature. The longer she looked, the more unsettled she felt, yet also strangely connected. There was a sense of recognition, of familiarity, as though it whispered to her in a language she could not understand. No, she finally said, her voice colder than she intended. It's not safe. Yet despite the words, Kalith took another step forward, her boots crunching softly on the stony ground. She hesitated only for a moment before reaching out with a gloved hand, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface of the relic. The sensation that coursed through her was immediate, a jolt of energy, warm and electric, running up her arm and straight into her chest. Her breath caught and she instinctively pulled back, her pulse quickening. Marcus was closer now, his hand on her shoulder. She could feel the heat of his touch through the thin fabric of her uniform. "What's happening?" he asked, voice low but filled with urgency. She didn't answer. Kaleth felt the familiar sensation of being watched, though there was no one else on the base. She cast a quick glance around, scanning the dim corridors for signs of movement, but found nothing. Still, that feeling lingered. There was something else here, something older, far older than anything she had ever encountered in her diplomatic career. Something far older than the Zorinthians even. "Something's wrong," Kaleth muttered under her breath, her mind racing. She took another step forward, her instincts fighting against the logical part of her brain that warned her to leave it alone. Marcus, despite his skepticism, stepped in closer, peering over her shoulder at the artifact. "It's just a piece of old tech, right?" His tone was meant to sound reassuring, but the unease in his voice was impossible to ignore. "Nothing about this is just old tech," Kaleth replied, her voice barely a whisper as she continued to study the object. The patterns on its surface had begun to shift more rapidly now, the symbols pulsing in a slow, deliberate rhythm, almost as if reacting to her presence. The air felt thick with static, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Then, as if in response to her thoughts, the artifact shifted. It wasn't a subtle movement, but one that shook the very air around them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the metal walls of the base groaning under the sudden pressure. Kaleth's instincts kicked in. "We need to move," she said sharply, her eyes locked on the object, but her mind already calculating their next steps. It was clear now that the artifact was far from inert. But what was it? And what had triggered this response? Before she could turn away, a faint sound, almost like a low hum, filled the air. It was coming from the artifact. Kaleth froze, her eyes widening as the symbols etched into its surface began to glow, faint traces of light spreading outward in intricate patterns. Marcus stepped back, his breath shallow. "What the hell is that?" Kaleth didn't answer. She was too focused on the object, watching in growing horror as it responded to some unseen trigger, as if it had been waiting for something, as if it had been waiting for her. The hum grew louder, almost deafening now. Kaleth's chest tightened. She reached out again, her fingers brushing against the symbols. This time, more deliberately, a sharp pain shot through her, a searing heat that spread through her veins. She gasped, her hand jerking away instinctively, but the damage had already been done. The hum turned into a sharp, almost unbearable screech. The artifact flared with light, blinding Kaleth for a split second, and then nothing. The light faded, and the hum dissipated into silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sudden calm was more unnerving than the storm outside. Kaleth's breath was shallow, and her heart thudded in her chest. She didn't know what had happened, what this was, but she knew it was no accident. Something had been triggered, something had changed, and whatever it was, it had begun with her. Marcus was the first to break the silence. What the hell just happened?" Kaleth shook her head, her mind reeling from the intensity of the experience. "I don't know," she said softly, though she knew in her gut that they had crossed a line. Whatever this artifact was, it had changed something inside of her. But what? And why did it feel like it was just the beginning? The air inside the asteroid base was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint hum of the failing power systems. Kaleth stood motionless in the dimly lit corridor, her body still tingling with the residual energy from the artifact. Her mind, however, was far from calm. Each breath she took felt heavy, strained, as if the very air in the base had changed. Marcus stood a few paces away, his eyes fixed on her, a look of confusion and concern etched across his face. The questions between them hung thick in the air, unanswered. What had they just triggered? Why had the artifact responded to her? And most importantly, what did it all mean? "What the hell just happened?" Marcus repeated, his voice louder this time, his frustration evident. Kalith shook her head slowly, her mind too clouded to form any coherent response. The pain, the blinding heat, had been unlike anything she had ever experienced. A Zorinthian's physiology was resilient, nearly impervious to injury, but this had been different. It was as if something had invaded her body, not physically, but in some other, intangible way. The sensation lingered in her veins, a pulse of foreign energy that thrummed against the walls of her chest. She pressed her palm against the cool metal of the wall, her knuckles whitening as she tried to steady herself. Her body was betraying her. "We should leave," Marcus said, taking a cautious step toward her. His voice softened, but there was no hiding the edge of urgency in his tone. "We need to report this. Get to the main base. Contact the others." But Kalith could barely hear him. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Every part of her being screamed at her to run, to get as far away from that damn artifact as possible. Yet there was something else, something deeper, that told her she couldn't. Not yet. "We can't," she replied, her voice low, almost to herself. "We're not ready. There's something I need to understand." Marcus frowned. "Understand? What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. She could see the doubt in his expression, the confusion that mirrored her own, but there was something more there too. Beneath the surface, she sensed the flicker of fear. He hadn't felt the artifact's call like she had. He didn't understand what it had done to her. "You don't feel it," she said, her voice harder now, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. "The change, the connection." Marcus hesitated, his brow furrowing. I don't know what you mean, Kalith. All I know is that this place is getting worse. The storm outside is intensifying. The power systems are failing. And the artifact, whatever it is, isn't going to be our answer." Kalith's gaze flicked to the corridor behind him, her mind whirling. The strange energy still hummed in the air, almost imperceptible, but there, like a whisper. She could feel it, pulling at her, urging her forward. She had to understand, had to know why it had chosen her. "I have to stay here," she said quietly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I can't leave until I know what this is, until I understand what it wants from me." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, the lights flickered, casting long shadows in the hallway. The hum of the base's failing systems grew louder, a whining, desperate sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Kalith felt it then, a sudden shift in the air, a crackling static that danced across her skin. She clenched her fists, her pulse quickening. The artifact was calling to her again. "Something's wrong," she muttered, more to herself than to Marcus. She could sense it, deep within her, an almost physical sensation of something growing, something awakening. The storm outside howled louder, its wind rattling the windows of the base, but Kalith barely noticed. She was already moving, her steps quick and purposeful as she turned back toward the artifact chamber. Marcus followed her, his footsteps hesitant, unsure. "Kalith," he called after her, but she didn't stop. "What are you doing? We need to get out of here. This isn't safe." She didn't respond. The only thing she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, the heat rising in her chest, the magnetic pull of the artifact urging her on. By the time they reached the chamber, the artifact was already glowing again, its symbols brighter, pulsing with an intensity that almost made the walls of the base shake. It was as if it recognized her presence, as if it needed her. Kalith approached it cautiously, her gloved hand raised. She could feel the strange energy pressing against her skin, just beneath the surface. The artifact had changed, become more active, as if it was waiting for something from her. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface, and the moment her skin made contact, the response was immediate. The ground beneath them trembled, the hum of the artifact escalating into a sharp, high-pitched tone that reverberated through the air. Kalith gasped, stepping back, but her hand remained on the artifact. A sharp pain shot through her again, but this time it wasn't the same as before. It was deeper, more insistent, as if something was trying to enter her, to twist inside of her. "Kalith!" Marcus shouted, his voice strained with panic. "Let go of it!" But Kalith couldn't. The pain was growing unbearable, but at the same time, it was pulling her in, binding her to the relic. Her vision blurred, and she felt the unmistakable sensation of something changing within her. She gasped, her chest tightening, as a sudden heat flared in her body. Something foreign, something new. Before she could pull away, the artifact flared with a burst of light, brighter than before, and a wave of energy surged through her. The pain reached a crescendo, and she screamed, the world around her spinning wildly. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Kalith collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, the energy draining from her body, leaving her trembling and disoriented. Marcus rushed to her side, his hands on her shoulders, his voice frantic. "Kalith, talk to me, what happened?" She could barely answer. Her throat was tight, her body slick with sweat, her mind reeling from the onslaught. Something had changed. Something was different. Her hand fell limply away from the artifact, and she looked up at Marcus, her breath shallow. I think it's too late to leave now," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "I think it's already begun." And as she spoke, she felt the first stirrings of something deep inside her, a strange, unsettling sensation she couldn't quite name. A shift, a change, a beginning. The quiet hum of the asteroid base had become oppressive in the aftermath of Kalith's encounter with the artifact. Its glow had dimmed, leaving the chamber cold and silent. But the weight of the moment still hung heavy in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Kalith sat on the edge of a metal crate, her hands trembling as she attempted to steady herself. The strange, unsettling heat still pulsed within her, a constant, throbbing presence beneath her skin. She hadn't spoken for a long time, not since the artifact had released its energy into her. Every part of her mind screamed to understand what had happened, to piece together the shattered fragments of logic that had been torn apart in that brief moment of contact. But nothing made sense. Marcus stood across the room, his posture tense as he paced back and forth. The same confusion that mirrored Kalith's own was written all over his face. But there was something else, too. Fear. Fear of what had just transpired, and fear of what might come next. "What the hell was that, Kalith?" he asked again, his voice low but edged with frustration. "That thing. That artifact. What did it do to you?" Kalith slowly raised her head, her eyes bloodshot and dull. She had heard the questions, but they all felt like a dull echo. The truth she had feared was beginning to sink in, a gnawing certainty she couldn't ignore. But still, she remained silent. For once, she had no answers, no explanations. Instead, her gaze flicked to the control panel on the wall, still flickering weakly, and the nagging pull of the artifact's influence gnawed at her. She could feel it, like an invisible thread connecting her to the relic, an unspoken bond that demanded attention. She wasn't sure whether she was imagining it, but it felt like the artifact itself was watching her, or perhaps, more accurately, waiting. "We need to get to the med bay," Marcus continued, his voice growing more insistent. "There has to be some kind of explanation. We can run diagnostics, get some scans. You're not yourself." Her pulse quickened at his words. The logical part of her, the part that had been trained to always seek order in the chaos of the galaxy, knew that he was right. She should have done that already. She should have let him help her, let him find some tangible explanation. But something about that thought felt wrong. Something about this situation told her that no scan, no diagnostic would offer answers. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely a whisper. She rose to her feet with effort, steadying herself against the crate. "I don't need your scans. I need to understand what this means." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat as he noticed the change in her demeanor. The way her eyes glinted with an unfamiliar intensity, the rigid set of her shoulders. It was as if something inside of her had shifted, something fundamental, something beyond her control. Before either of them could speak, a sudden, sharp pain tore through Kalith's chest. She gasped, clutching her side, her vision blurring at the edges as the room seemed to tilt around her. For a moment she feared she would collapse right then and there. But she couldn't. Not now. Kalith! Marcus rushed to her side, his hands gripping her elbows, steadying her. What's happening? But Kalith couldn't answer. Her mind raced, but her body felt distant, as though it wasn't fully hers anymore. The pain intensified, spreading like wildfire through her veins. It wasn't just physical, it was inside her, twisting, wrapping around her very being. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the pain stopped. She staggered backward, nearly falling, but Marcus caught her. His face was pale, his mouth tight with concern. But there was something else now. A flicker of realization. Something dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just worried for her anymore. He was starting to fear what this meant for both of them. "What did you feel?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "Tell me, what did you experience just now?" Kalith swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in her throat. "Something inside me. It's wrong." Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. I feel like it's taking over. Like something else is inside me." Marcus's hands tightened around her arms, pulling her closer. His voice was urgent now, all pretense of calm gone. "We need to get out of here. We need to get back to the Zorinthian fleet, or at least to Earth. The storm is going to make that difficult, but we—" "No." Her voice cut through his words like a blade. She could feel the pressure building, a buzzing hum that filled the room, and the artifact's pulse seemed to echo within her very body. "We can't leave, not yet." Marcus stared at her, confusion flickering across his features. "Why? Kalith, you're not okay. I'm not leaving until I understand what this means, until I can control it." For a moment he didn't respond. The tension between them hung thick in the air, the weight of the silence almost suffocating. And then Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. "All right, then let's at least figure out what's going on. We need answers." With that, the two of them moved toward the artifact chamber again, though the air in the base had thickened with a sense of dread. Kalith could feel it in her bones. She had crossed a line and she couldn't turn back. The chamber was as it had been before, silent, the artifact now lying dormant, its glowing symbols flickering weakly in the dim light. Kalith approached cautiously, feeling the familiar pulse of energy reaching out to her. Her hand hovered just above its surface, but she hesitated. Something had changed. Something inside her had awakened, something that tied her to this ancient relic. Marcus stood back, his eyes fixed on her, unsure of what to do. The air between them was charged with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Suddenly, the artifact began to hum again, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor. Kalith's heart raced as the symbols began to glow brighter. It was almost as though the relic was calling to her once more. "I think I've made a terrible mistake," she whispered, the realization settling like a stone in her gut. The artifact's energy surged, and with a sickening jolt, Kalith's body was once again flooded with the alien power, the force of it filling her mind with fragmented images, flashes of a time-long past, images of a world, a race, and an ancient history that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. But one image, one feeling, lingered above all the rest, an overwhelming sense of connection. And then, in an instant, she understood. The artifact had not merely chosen her, it had merged with her, and now it was up to her to decipher the strange bond that held her and Marcus together, for better or worse. Kalith staggered back, her breath coming in short gasps. She could feel Marcus's gaze on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet it. She wasn't sure if she could handle the truth of what was happening to her. "What is it, Kalith?" Marcus asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned to him, her eyes wide with the revelation that had begun to take root. "We're not alone in this, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling. "There's more to this artifact than we realized, and I think we've just set something in motion we can't stop." The storm outside howled louder, the base groaning under its pressure, and the strange bond between them pulsed stronger, as if the universe itself was warning them that they had crossed a line. And now, there was no turning back. The base trembled, a quiet, steady pulse reverberating through its walls, as if the asteroid itself were responding to the growing tension inside. Kalith stood by the artifact, her fingertips still lightly brushing against its jagged surface, but now with a newfound sense of dread. The pulse inside her body matched the artifact's, its erratic energy thrumming in her chest, a constant reminder of the power it had chosen to bestow. She closed her eyes, breathing shallowly, trying to focus on the thrumming sensation that now seemed to echo through her very soul. She had never felt more disconnected from herself. "Kalith." Marcus's voice sliced through the quiet, urgent but gentle, as if he feared she might shatter if spoken to too harshly. "We need to leave. This thing is doing something to you." Her head turned slowly to face him. His concern was palpable, his brow furrowed, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and helplessness. He was right to be afraid, but not for the reasons he thought. "I don't think I can leave, Marcus," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the distant hum of the artifact. I think it's too late." Marcus's mouth opened, but the words he might have said faltered, swallowed by the thickening air. She knew he was struggling with the knowledge she was hinting at, the same truth that now gripped her in an unyielding vice. The artifact hadn't just connected with her, it had changed her. "I've felt it before," she continued, her voice steadying, the truth pressing its weight on her chest. "Not like this, but I've sensed it. Something ancient, something alive. The moment I touched it, it wasn't just a piece of technology. It's a conduit, Marcus. A bridge to something far older than anything we've ever encountered, and now it's using me." Marcus stepped forward, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. He stopped just out of reach, his expression a mask of control, though his eyes betrayed his panic. "What does that mean? What do you mean it's using you?" Kalith took a deep breath. The bond between her and the artifact was far from simple. It was the echo of a centuries-old existence, a pulse from a time long forgotten, reverberating through her consciousness. She could feel it in the recesses of her mind, twisting the way she thought, the way she felt. But she also knew she wasn't entirely herself anymore. She wasn't just Kalith, a skilled agent of Zorinthian intelligence. Not anymore. "I think the artifact is alive. Not in the way we understand life, but aware." Her voice trembled slightly as the gravity of her words sank in. "It's been waiting for someone like me, someone who could bridge the gap between it and the universe. And now, it wants me to unlock it. All of it." The room seemed to close in around them, the very air feeling thick, as if it were pressing down on them. Kalith's hands curled into fists, fighting the urge to pull away from the artifact. The power inside her surged again, the familiar sensation of an invisible hand grasping her insides, pulling her closer to something she couldn't yet comprehend. "Unlock it," Marcus repeated, the confusion in his voice giving way to something far darker. "What are you talking about, Kalith? You're talking about something that could kill you. It's already hurting you." She met his eyes, the conflict in her heart mirroring the intensity of the storm outside. "I can feel it, Marcus. There's no way out. The power inside of me, it's too far gone. It's changing me, shaping me into something else, something different. You can still fight it." His voice was raw, his desperation creeping in. "We can still find a way to stop it. We can get to the Zorinthian fleet, figure out how to reverse whatever's happening to you." She shook her head slowly, her eyes dull but determined. "I've thought about that too, but there's no going back, Marcus. If I pull away from it now, I'll die. The artifact is a link to something far beyond anything we've encountered. It's not just technology, it's life, and that life wants to break free. He stared at her, a mix of fear and disbelief in his gaze. He took another step toward her, but this time there was something else in his posture, a quiet understanding. He might not know what was happening, but he knew Kayleith was beyond saving. There was no way to fight it now, and she knew, with terrible certainty, that she had already made a choice. She'd always known there would be a price that would now come due. "You're saying you'll let it take you?" Marcus's voice was nearly a growl now, the question filled with frustration and betrayal. "You're just going to accept this? Die for it? I can't let you do that." "I don't have a choice." Kayleith's voice was flat, without the usual bravado she carried. There was a finality to her words. "I've seen glimpses, Marcus, in the artifact, the memories it unlocked, the power it gave me. If I don't do this, we'll never understand what's out there, what it's trying to show us. This universe, it's not just random. It's a system, a pattern, something far beyond what we've been taught to believe." His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with the struggle of wanting to protect her, but knowing deep down that the power inside her was something beyond even his understanding. "You're talking about sacrificing yourself for something you don't even know will work. This could destroy everything, Kayleith." "I'm not sacrificing myself," she replied, her voice softer now. "I'm choosing something bigger, something we can't even begin to comprehend. But it has to be me, Marcus, no one else. This is the price I have to pay, to save everything." A heavy silence fell between them, as the storm raged outside, its thunder a distant reminder of how small they truly were in the grand design of the universe. Kayleith's hands slowly reached up to grasp the artifact once more, the familiar hum pulsing through her veins, drowning out everything but the intensity of the connection. She could feel its presence now, familiar, like an old friend whispering forgotten truths into her mind. She could see it now, all of it. The intricate, endless web of existence, the threads of life and death intertwined, and the power of the artifact itself, a force that could tear the galaxy apart or unite it in ways she couldn't even begin to fathom. And in that moment, she understood. Her sacrifice wasn't just for herself, it was for the galaxy, for the future, and it was a price she was willing to pay. With one final steadying breath, Kayleith pressed her palm fully to the artifact's surface, her body tensing with the overwhelming flood of energy that surged through her. Marcus reached for her, his hand grazing her arm, but it was too late. The connection was complete, and there was no turning back. Kayleith closed her eyes, knowing the storm inside her had just begun. The asteroid was still, but it felt alive. The quiet hum of the artifact, that had once echoed with ancient power, now thrummed in time with Kayleith's heartbeat, a rhythmic pulse that filled every corner of her mind, her body, and her soul. She stood in the center of the room, her hand still resting against the artifact's surface, her senses buzzing with an energy so vast that it felt as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Behind her, Marcus stood at a careful distance, his presence a solid, steady force in the air. She could feel his gaze, even without turning. There was no anger in it anymore, only quiet acceptance and something else she couldn't quite name. Understanding, perhaps, or perhaps something far deeper. "It's done," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the artifact. She could feel the energy coiling inside her, familiar now. She had become one with it, intertwined with the relic's secrets, with its ancient knowledge. In her mind, she could see it all, the galaxy's infinite, twisting threads, the patterns that connected every life, every star. It was as if she had been handed the key to unlock the very fabric of existence, and yet she could also feel its weight. The cost of this power was not lost on her. It was a burden, a responsibility she could no longer deny. Kayleith turned slowly, her eyes locking with Marcus's. The familiar warmth of his gaze settled on her, though there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty. He had stayed with her through it all, through the storm, through the pain, through the darkness. And now, here they were, standing on the edge of something both terrifying and profound. "You're different," he said, the words simple but weighted with meaning. Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "I'm not the same, Marcus. Not anymore. And neither are you." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out toward her, though he hesitated just before touching her. His fingers brushed the edge of her arm, as if afraid she might shatter. She allowed the contact, knowing this moment was important, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had led them here. "You're not going to leave," he said softly, though it wasn't a question. Kalith shook her head slowly. "I can't go back to what I was. Not after everything the artifact showed me. The choices we make, have ripples. This..." She gestured to her chest, to the life growing inside her, the life they had both come to accept as part of their fates. "This child, Marcus. This bridge between our species, between everything." The hum of the artifact seemed to intensify, as if it too recognized the weight of her words. Kalith felt a pull, a magnetic force that drew her toward something beyond her understanding, beyond even what the relic had shown her. The future, she knew, was still uncertain, but the path ahead felt clearer than it ever had. "You're still unsure," Marcus observed, his voice gentle, but the concern was evident. "This child, it's part of both of us, but it's not just that. You've seen what it means. You've seen what we could mean." Kalith met his eyes, her heart pounding as if it wanted to escape her chest. "I know what it means, Marcus. I know that the child could be the key to the galaxy's survival, but it could also destroy us all. It's the legacy of an extinct race, an entire civilization that thought they could shape the future by creating something like this. And now, I'm the one who has to decide if I'll allow it to unfold. If I'll allow us to unfold." The silence between them was heavy, both of them standing in the aftermath of everything that had happened. They had fought, struggled, resisted, and yet here they were, standing side by side, both transformed by forces they could not control. But perhaps that was the point. The universe had always been unpredictable, and sometimes the only way forward was to embrace the unknown. "I think," Kalith said slowly, her voice low but filled with certainty, "that we were meant to be here, Marcus, both of us, together. This child, it's more than just the future of our species. It's the future of the galaxy, of everything." Marcus took another step closer, his hand finally resting against her shoulder, steady and sure. "Then let's face it together," he said quietly. "No matter what comes next." Kalith didn't need to answer. The words were already written in the air between them, in the very fabric of the universe they were connected to. The hum of the artifact was no longer just a sound. It was a promise, a bond that tied them both to something greater than themselves. In the distance, the stars outside the station blinked softly, as if the universe itself had paused to watch. The storm that had ravaged their lives had subsided, and now all that remained was the quiet certainty that the future had yet to be written. But as she looked at Marcus, standing beside her, the uncertainty faded. There was still fear, still the echo of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost. But there was also something else, a shared purpose, a shared path, a life to create together. And in that moment, Kalith knew that no matter what the universe threw at them next, they would face it side by side. With the artifact's hum still resonating in her chest, she allowed herself a single fleeting breath of peace. The journey was far from over, but it was only just beginning, and no matter where it led, she had found something worth fighting for. Together, they would uncover the secrets of the galaxy. Together, they would navigate the unknown, and together, they would see this through. A new chapter had begun, and they were ready.